Good morning. Thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Chris Murphy. I have the honor of being the junior senator from the state of Connecticut. This country is rising up and demanding that the United States Congress take action to address the epidemic of gun violence in this nation. And we're doing it in part because of the courage of survivors and victims of gun violence who all across America are demanding action. I have the privilege to begin today by introducing to you two of those heroic survivors. Tina Mines is from California. Her father, Damien, was an employee of San Bernardino County who was shot and killed by a coworker in his office, and his wife, who both pledged allegiance to ISIS on December 2nd, 2015. She will be followed by Reverend Sharon Risher. Her mother, Ethel, and cousins, Susie Jackson and Tawanza Sanders, were shot and killed a year ago, June 17th, 2015, in the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, where that shooter was able to buy a weapon because of a loophole in the nation's background checks laws. Please welcome to the podium first Tina and then Reverend Risher.
Thank you, Senators Schumer, Blumenthal, Murphy, Feinstein, Booker, Markey, and Baldwin for inviting me here today. I am grateful to you and members of your delegation for taking action on this issue so that other families do not have to live with the heartbreak and anguish my family has been forced to endure for the rest of our lives. Your leadership has been a source of comfort to my family and me. My name is Tina Mines. My father, Damien Mines, was killed on December 2nd last year at the Inland Regional Center while at a work event with the San Bernardino County Environmental Health Department when a coworker and his wife, who had pledged allegiance to the terrorist group ISIS, burst through the doors of his office, spraying bullets from their semi-automatic rifles. My dad, along with 13 of his coworkers, was killed. In mere seconds, my life and the lives of my mother and sister were irrevocably changed. Our family was small, but close, very close. Dad was always happy to spend time with us, whether it was helping us with our homework, teaching us how to ride our bikes, helping coach our soccer teams, or later, just going for long walks with us. We traveled the world together and spent countless hours talking about the importance of helping others and everything else from politics to current events to whatever was on our minds. In our house, there was laughter all the time. Now that laughter is gone. As news of the horrific mass shooting on Sunday morning in Orlando began to unfold in front of our eyes, and the numbers of dead and injured continued to rise, I was immediately taken back to December 2nd. I know exactly what those families were going through. I know what it's like to get the call telling you the worst news you could ever imagine. And the pain of knowing that this was happening again in our country to so many families was just too much to bear. Each person in that club was someone's child, a sibling, a lover, a friend. I wish I could say I'm surprised that we're here again, but sadly I'm not. And we will continue to be here again and again if our elected officials fail to take action that prevents dangerous and hateful people from getting their hands on a deadly weapon. It's time to disarm hate. One day after the San Bernardino mass shooting, Congress had the opportunity to take meaningful action to make our nation safer. But instead, a majority of senators voted in lockstep with the gun lobby against a common sense measure that would have prevented people on a federal terrorism watch list from purchasing guns. How can we ignore the fact that in this country we make it easy and legal for dangerous people, including suspected terrorists, to commit unspeakable acts by providing them with easy access to guns? Suspected terrorists are prohibited from boarding planes, yet they can still legally purchase firearms. Since 2004, more than 2,000 terror suspects have taken advantage of this loophole in our laws to buy guns. I can't wrap my mind around why anyone in Congress finds this acceptable. Closing the terror gap could have prevented what happened on Sunday in Orlando. The FBI had investigated the shooter multiple times for terrorist ties and homicidal threats. Based on his history, terror gap legislation could have blocked the gun sale to him and prevented the deaths, injuries, and emotional scars on hundreds of our fellow Americans. It wasn't easy for me to be here today. It wasn't easy for my mom and my sister and I to get on an airplane and fly across the country. We are still in very early stages of our grief. I think about my dad every single day. I lost my father, my best friend, in a horrific and brutal way that seems to defy all reason. But that is also why I couldn't not be here today. I want my story to remind others that it doesn't have to be this way. It's time we take a stand in this country and disarm hate. Thank you. Reverend Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Schumer, Blumenthal, Murphy, Feinstein, Booker, Baldwin, and Markey for bringing us here together today. It's hard to believe that tomorrow will be 1 year since I received the devastating news that my mother and 2 of my cousins were among 9 people who had been shot and killed while praying at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, by a man so filled with hate, armed with a gun. The pain of knowing my mother and cousins were killed in a racially motivated hate crime carried out against black churchgoers peacefully praying is something that I carry with me every day. I've spent the most of my professional life working as a ER trauma chaplain, but no amount of training could have prepared me for the shock, pain, and emptiness that consumed me in the days after the death of my family members. I struggled to answer why my loved ones and so many other people have been killed. Along with so many Americans, I was baffled at how the shooter was able to get his hands on a gun and how we lived in a country filled with so much hatred. Racism, sexism, misogyny, nationalism, homophobia, and religious intolerance are all things that we have sadly experienced over and over in this country. But hate becomes deadly when we make it far too easy for those intent on causing harm to get their hands on a gun. And that is why I'm here today, to disarm hate. My mama's life was an expression of her faith, her strength, and resiliency. Coming from humble means, my mama always wanted more. The circumstances of her life were hard, yet she found a way to keep on dreaming. After the shooting in Charleston, I needed to be a part of the solution, to find a way to keep on dreaming like my mother did. I needed to channel my pain in action. I became part of this group, Everytown Survivor Network, joining my voice with others who have experienced the same incomprehensible grief. On Sunday, when I learned that 49 people were killed at a gay club in Orlando and 53 more were injured, making it the largest mass shooting in the modern U.S. history. I turned off the TV. I did not participate in social media because my heart could not take hearing about that, knowing that families were getting ready to feel the same kind of pain that all the people in Charleston, and especially the 9 families, were feeling. I was overcome with sadness and anger. I was full of heartbreaks for the victims and their families, whose lives are forever changed physically and emotionally by the sheer horror of that day. I am still learning how to walk this walk of action and advocacy. I must profess, I don't know all the things. I don't know all of our nation gun laws point by point, but I do know that the unspeakable grief that accompanies the death of a loved one killed by gun violence is something that stays in your heart. I know that there is more that we all can do, we must do to prevent the next tragedy. And I know that America is with us. In less than a week since the Orlando tragedy, more than 19,000 Americans have called their members of Congress, and more than 70,000 people have signed petitions demanding our elected leaders do more. As our communities come together to remember the lives taken in the horrific events that took place in Charleston, South Carolina 1 year ago, and the lives taken in the tragedy that occurred in Orlando on Sunday. And more than 90 Americans are killed every day by gun violence, and 100 more are injured. I plead with you. I plead with you with everything that I have in my heart. I ask everyone to join me in this walk to disarm hate. And for those of you watching this, I urge you to text disarm hate to 64433. Together, America, together, senators, everybody, we can build a safe future and spare other communities from experiencing tragedy by someone who should have never had access to a gun. Thank you. Back to Senator Murphy.
We all wish that overflowing grief that you hear from Sharon and from Tina was isolated. But it happens every day, 80 times across this nation. Someone's life is cut short by a gun. And every day there are 80 families who live through that same incalculable, undescribable sorrow. And this weekend, 50 families are figuring out how to reorder their lives because their beautiful son or daughter, sister or brother is no longer with them, just because they wanted to go to a nightclub and have fun celebrating with their friends and their community. How on earth, in the face of the largest mass shooting in the history of this nation, could the United States Senate ignore it in the week following? That is the question that we all asked ourselves when we got here on Monday. And that is the reason why we took the floor yesterday at 11:20 and held it for 15 hours, demanding that this week the Senate take up votes on common sense measures to make sure that terrorists and would-be killers can't get their hands on firearms. Common sense consensus measures that are supported by 90% of the American public. The members behind me were there on the floor, 40 Democratic senators joining together to make this passionate case. Senator Blumenthal and Senator Booker there with me for the duration of the 15 hours. My legs are a little bit rubbery, but my heart is strong this morning because I know that we made a difference yesterday. And I know that we galvanized support all across this country. 10,000 people called our office individually yesterday from every state in the nation offering their support. And I know that we were given that chance because Senator Dianne Feinstein, for years, has made it a priority to make sure that those who are suspected of terrorism cannot get their hands on a deadly weapon. And as she will tell you, had her amendment been in effect, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about Orlando. I thank her for giving us the power to bring that issue to the floor yesterday. And so we've got a number of members that want to speak, but I'm glad that we are on a path forward to get votes on these two amendments. And we'll see where members come down. We'll see if Republican members can vote with the NRA, vote against 90% of their constituents who want terrorists to be kept from buying guns and return home and look the victims of gun violence and the people who care about this issue deeply in the eye and tell them that they've done their job. We'll see. But when we started this week, we didn't know whether we were going to have any debate or any vote on these measures. Now we believe we're on a path to get folks on the record. And that's a start. Again, I want to thank Senator Booker and Senator Blumenthal, Senator Baldwin, Senator Markey, Senator Schumer for all being down there on the floor yesterday. I didn't have to do as much talking as you normally have to do because I had all of these men and women by my side. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey.
I want to thank again Senator Murphy, who showed a level of courage and grit that is so sorely needed in the United States Senate. I want to thank the victims, who it's hard not to get emotional about, who are here right now. And usually I get very excited when Americans come together, and I get very uplifted when you have diverse people coming together, blacks, whites, Latinos, Christians, Jews, Muslims. When you see diverse groups get together for a passionate purpose, that's an exciting thing. But this is an agonizing affiliation represented by these women. These are people who are bound by brutality and bloodshed. They're tied together by tragedy. And their numbers are growing every day and every hour. Victims of gun violence, of savagery that is preventable. And they are not content to wait on change. And how can we be? People who think things will just get better? Well, every hour, every day, it continues to go, that march of violence in our country, and then sometimes it doesn't march. Sometimes there's a new town, or an Orlando, or San Bernardino, or Charleston, where it, in most savage manner, leaps forward, and another 10, 20, 49 Americans are gunned down. And if we don't have that courageous empathy that could look at them and not just see other, but see themselves, see your mother, see your child, to know that you're doing nothing invites those tragedies into more Americans' lives and possibly into your neighborhood, your community, your church, your playground, your school. And so we can't just wait. We have to make something happen. And so Senator Murphy's right. That old saying I learned when I came to Washington, change does not come from Washington, it comes to Washington by people demanding it happens, people saying enough is enough. No more business as usual. Right now, what we need, as a whole bunch of Democrats got together yesterday and forced to the floor a vote on amendments that won't solve gun violence problems in America, but it certainly will make it better, that a known and suspected terrorist who can't even get on a plane, we can pass legislation that will make sure that person also can't go out and buy a gun. That's not radical. This legislation is pending now. And it's up to us to change the hearts and minds of those people who are probably intent on voting against it. This is a fight that should not belong only to the victims of gun violence. This is an American fight to do what our country said it would do when we founded this nation: make for the common defense, ensure domestic tranquility. I want to bring up someone who was with me all night long. And I wish we were hanging out, doing something social, but last night he stood with me and Senator Murphy and 40 of our colleagues, but he's not new to this. He's been a champion as a senator. He was a champion as one of the top legal officers in our nation, and he fights this fight every day. I want to bring up my friend and my colleague and a hero from last night, Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Thank you, Cory. Let me just say, if you got to spend 15 hours on the Senate floor with anyone, I want to do it with Cory Booker and with my great friend and colleague from Connecticut and teammate on this issue, Chris Murphy. And if you have to spend 15 hours straight on the floor of the Senate, there is no better cause to champion than stopping gun violence. The most difficult question I am asked, having spent the better part of 25 years on this issue, is what has changed? And the answer is that Americans have changed in their realization that gun violence can not only be prevented, but it must be prevented. And it is linked not only to hatred and bigotry and random anger and sometimes severe mental illness, but also to terrorism. The simple fact is that people pledging allegiance to violent extremists abroad, whatever label you want to use for them, are now committing acts of terror here, acts of terror and hatred in nightclubs and churches and schools, places that have been assumed to be safe for our whole history. No place is safe in America from acts of hatred and terror. And just as we must stop terrorist extremists abroad from advancing and gaining territory and intimidating people there, we have to stop acts of terror and hatred at home. These stories are worth 1,000 of our words. This picture, disarm hate, says it all. That's what Americans feel now in a way that is unprecedented in our history. And part of it is what we did on the Senate floor yesterday, giving it a face and a voice in elected officials who are willing to take a stand. When I came to the Senate just almost 6 years ago, the idea of having 40 of our colleagues go to the Senate floor and unequivocally and clearly, emphatically take this kind of stand would have been difficult to expect. It happened yesterday. And it happened without anybody twisting arms or needing to persuade people. They volunteered. There was an outpouring of our colleagues' support. That fact reflects how America has changed. One last point. America wants the Senate to change Washington. Americans want change. They want us to be change makers and change agents. This issue presents an opportunity and an obligation to show America we can change. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to change the dynamic and debate and stand up to the NRA and the opponents of gun violence, people who are too dangerous to board a plane are too dangerous to buy a gun. And to prevent them from buying guns and other dangerous people from having access to firearms, there need to be background checks expanded. It's really that simple. If the Attorney General of the United States, based on facts and evidence, deems someone to be aiding or engaging in terrorist activity, that's the standard in the law that's been proposed, they should be too dangerous to buy a gun. And there is a due process means to verify any claimed mistakes and to remove that name from a list. And the background checks should be seen as a means to enforce those laws and existing laws that keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Someone who has been a model for me on all of these laws, including stopping the spread of assault weapons, which should be another priority. These two measures are just a start. We need to stop the spread of assault weapons and better protect survivors of domestic violence and remove the unique immunity shield from legal responsibility that the gun industry enjoys and ban straw purchases and illegal trafficking. All those measures can follow these two. They are a start. And Dianne Feinstein has been at the forefront of this effort. She's been a model for me when I was Attorney General in advocating common sense, sensible measures. She is now continued at the forefront, not just as a strong voice, but a great intellect and symbol of courage. And so I'm really honored to be with her today and to join in the amendment that she's offered.
Thank you for your exaggerated comment about my intellect. I appreciate that. And I want to thank those who did the 15 hours on the floor yesterday, because anyone who watched saw the emotion and I think saw the commitment, and also, I hope, saw the harm that's been done to this great nation. Now, it'd be one thing if I thought that it was going downhill. I don't. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. This morning, John Brennan, in an open hearing, say that he would anticipate that there will be more attacks by ISIL. As they lose territory in Iraq, they become more violent, bigger proselytizers. And in fact, what we see in this latest attack is the homegrown lone wolf and the enormous damage he did to literally what are hundreds of lives. Many dead, many seriously wounded, many families affected for the rest of their life. Our witnesses today, I think their courage and their stamina and their determination to stand up and say, America, do something. So what I have tried to do is just that. And we have 3 different levels of terrorist lists. And the bill that we would propose, we have developed with the Attorney General. The Deputy Attorney General, Sally Yates, called yesterday afternoon and said that Justice would support it. And last night, the president's chief of staff called to say that the White House would support it. Gives me some heart that we may have some unity coming together to say terrorists and potential terrorists should not be able to buy a gun. And that's what this bill does. And it does it in a way that allows the Justice Department to be essentially pinged if somebody goes in and is on these lists and the background check is done. The background check would alert Justice, and Justice could prohibit the sale of that weapon. I think this is extraordinarily important. It would cover this latest shooter. It does have a good, strong appeal process. And I look back. I started this a long, long time ago when I was mayor of San Francisco, as a matter of fact. That's a long time ago. The assault weapons legislation, which I sponsored here and Senator Schumer sponsored in the House, was passed into law, lasted for 10 years. I believe it began to dry up the supply of assault weapons. It went out of effect. We couldn't get it back in. And so here we are today with this fulminating situation of guns, more and more sophisticated, more and more able to fall into the hands, gun shows where people can buy one of these with no questions asked, no background check. And the time has come, Mr. and Mrs. America, the time has come to do something about it. Now, this is just one piece of it. It should be the easiest piece, as Senator Blumenthal and Senator Murphy and Senator Booker know well, the easiest piece, because this deals with the potential terrorist, the potential person that's going to go in and create a massive act of violence. This is not a safer world than it was when we began. It is a much more dangerous world. So my hope is that when this comes up for a vote, which I think will likely be next Tuesday, we will have the votes to defeat it. And I just can't tell you how strongly I feel about being able to stand with this group of senators, particularly our young Turks who are willing to go down there, and you're welcome. Oh, yeah. And spend 15 hours on the floor of the United States Senate. Mr. and Mrs. California, please hear us. We're trying to do the right thing. And now I would like to introduce a relative newcomer, but somebody that cares deeply, who represents a great state, and that's Senator Baldwin.
I have seldom been at a press conference where I have seen so many in the audience, including the media, wiping away tears and holding back tears. It bears repeating that in the wake of Orlando and all of these horrific tragedies that our country has witnessed, we routinely ask for moments of silence. We tell victims that they're in our thoughts and prayers. And prayers are important, Reverend Vischer. Prayers are important. They are not enough. And it is time to disarm hate. As I woke to the news on Sunday of the worst gun attack in modern U.S. history by a U.S. citizen inspired by terrorist groups, filled with hate, but legally purchased a weapon of war and targeted the LGBT community at a gay bar on Latin night. I asked myself, how many more times do we have to wake up to news like this before we act. And so I was so proud yesterday to join my colleagues led by Senator Murphy on the floor. First time I was on the floor, I had the opportunity to read the names of the 49 victims in Orlando, tell a little bit, as much as we could collect quickly, on their lives. And it's so vital that we never forget. But I want to stress that this was a hate crime. What is a hate crime? Well, it's a crime. It's a crime in which the victims are targeted based on certain characteristics. In this case, LGBT Americans, Latino Americans. And it's meant not only to kill or gravely harm its victims, but to terrorize all those who share those characteristics, who belong to that community. I attended a vigil, a candlelight vigil in Madison, Wisconsin on Sunday night, hastily called together by people whose hearts were broken by this. And as a member of the LGBT community and surrounded by allies and many others in the LGBT community, I could see fear and terror. I remember back to the murder of Matthew Shepard, after whom the hate crimes legislation signed by President Obama in 2009 was named. And seeing young members of the LGBT community, their whole lives ahead of them, wanting to live out and proud, wondering whether doing so would subject them to bullying, discrimination, or violence. And I see that again. And so, as we join to disarm hate, I want to say that I am so appreciative of Senator Murphy's efforts to make sure that we get a vote on closing the gun show loophole so that every gun purchase is subject to a background check, and making sure that the FBI has the power to deny a weapon to somebody who is on the terror watch list. But there are many people who hate in America who won't necessarily be on a terror watch list. They may be inspired by domestic hate groups. And therefore, I will also be offering an amendment to fund the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division in their efforts to both prevent and fully investigate and enforce the hate crimes laws of this nation. And I hope, in light of all of this tragedy, that we have reached a moment where we have decided that our silence, our moments of silence, our thoughts and prayers are not enough. America is better than this, and we need to pull together. We need to stand united. And we can't let those who want to divide us win the day again. I am honored to call to the microphone my colleague of many years, even though he too is a relative newcomer to the United States Senate. We served many, many years in the House of Representatives together. And Ed Markey of Massachusetts was there on the floor time and time again last night. And thank you for your efforts. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin, and thank you, Tina. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for being here representing the hundreds of thousands of families who have lost loved ones to gun violence in our country. So we're at the critical juncture. We are at the juncture where we are about to have a showdown on the Senate floor on the issue of gun control in our country. In 2001, Muhammad Atta and 18 others hijacked planes and with box cutters killed the flight attendants, killed the pilots. We passed laws to prohibit box cutters, to prohibit knives, to prohibit guns from going onto those planes. We passed laws ensuring that all cargo that goes on planes would be screened for explosive. We made sure it would never happen again. This killer said that the Tsarnaev brothers from Boston were models for him. We know, unfortunately, that Muhammad Atta and what he did out of Boston, with the Tsarnaev brothers, what they did out of Boston, they are models for too many people. But we have a chance to do something. We have a chance to have a showdown on the Senate floor. The NRA has a vice-like grip on the Republican Party. The NRA has a vice-like grip on the agenda of the leader of their party, Donald Trump. Donald Trump says that he wants to make America great again, but he doesn't not want to make America safe again for people not to fear that we are going to have these kinds of horrific events that visit cities and towns all across our country. Donald Trump says that he has the ability to talk tough to terrorists, but he does not have the courage to talk tough to the NRA. That's the challenge for the Republican Party. What Senator Murphy did by leading this 15-hour debate on the Senate floor was to focus the American people on this issue. Senator Blumenthal, Senator Booker, everyone here has tried to help so that we can bring this issue to the American people so they can know whose side each party is on. The NRA has to stand for not relevant anymore in American politics. That's what Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Booker, and all of us tried to do, was to force the vote, to force the debate. I have had an amendment for years trying to add just $10 million a year to the CDC to do research on gun violence. They won't even allow that money to go in. But we don't need research on whether or not someone on a terror watch list should be able to purchase an assault weapon. We don't need research to determine that someone should not be able to go into a gun show and buy an assault weapon without a background check. We don't need research to know that someone shouldn't be able to go on Instagram and buy an Insta gun. We know you don't need research on that. And so that's where we are. And that's what Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Booker have done. They've set up this showdown. And this showdown is one that's the beginning of a long fight. I think we've reached the tipping point. I think it's all come together. Everyone realizes that the terrorist that we need to fear is not on the streets of Aleppo, or Mosul, or Fallujah. It's on the streets of the United States. And they will have guns unless we pass tough laws. And so this is, for me, just such a powerful moment. And yes, people go through sadness, but I think it's anger. I think it's anger that the American people feel. I think it's anger that the people up here feel about the inability to be able to do something about it. 22 years ago, on the House floor, when I served with him, Chuck Schumer led the fight to ban assault weapons. He was the leader in the House of Representatives. He was the person responsible for that becoming a law in the United States. And so, so to have him still here, with giving the leadership, the passion, the wisdom that is going to be necessary for us to win is very important. I give you, great senator from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer.
Thank you, Eddie. And I want to thank all of my colleagues for their moving eloquence. I particularly want to thank Senator Murphy and Senator Booker and Senator Blumenthal. They took the anguish of America and turned it into a spotlight that is now focused on the Senate. And every senator is now going to have to say whether they're for terrorists getting guns or against terrorists getting guns. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. And I thank them for their inspiration, for their great work, amazing job, as did so many of my colleagues do. Tammy's reading of the names was so touching to me, I really got a lump in my throat watching it. And I want to thank our victims who are here and the families. You know what the Bible tells us? When terrible, irrational tragedy befalls you, the natural human inclination is to curse the darkness, to turn inward on yourself and just be upset and angry. But these beautiful, beautiful people, and so many others like them, are lighting a candle. They're trying to make sure that the evil that happened to them, the horror that happened to them, is not repeated. And we thank them. Now, the reason we're going to win this fight is because of the people behind us and the thousands, unfortunately, like them. Sooner or later, we know we're going to win this fight. We have all had more than enough gun violence. Enough is enough. And the world has changed. Maybe 20 years ago, passing a law that said a terrorist couldn't get a gun was a good thing to do. But now we have ISIS and we have lone wolves, and it is essential. And when our Republican colleagues learn, when are they going to learn, our Republican colleagues, that the world has changed and there are lone wolves inspired by ISIS who can get guns, who are going to rip America apart until we get something done? Our Republican colleagues are feeling the heat for the first time. So instead of just saying they're against it, they come up with these proposals that are wolves in sheep's clothing. I've read in some of the press, well, there's a Democratic proposal and a Republican proposal. That's bunk. Do you know what the Republican proposal, Cornyn's proposal, says? It says that if the FBI thinks you're a terrorist, they have 3 days to go to court and get an adjudication, and if not, you can get a gun. Every terrorist will get a gun. If the FBI had that evidence, they would have arrested the person to begin with. It's a fake. It's a way for them to say they're doing something when they're doing nothing. It's a way for them to pay obeisance to the NRA without changing the world as it is. This idea that each terrorist has to, before they can be denied a gun, has a whole court case, and it has to be done in 3 days. Who would think that makes any sense? No one except a handful of our colleagues. And let me just say one other thing. Senator Toomey's so-called proposal was even worse. In addition to the problems that I mentioned, it also forces the government to rebuild the terror watch list, and every person has to go to a FISA court before they can go on. we'll be here for decades. You know who either drafts these proposals or has to give their stamp of approval to these proposals? The NRA. And we're here to say we need both measures. We need Senator Feinstein's measure, which says terrorists can't get a gun. But we also have to close the gun show loophole and the idea that anyone can buy unchecked, no questions asked, a gun online. A universal background check goes hand in hand with saying terrorists can't buy a gun if we're going to stop terrorists. And that's why we are pushing both amendments today. And one more word. My dear colleague Eddie Markey mentioned Donald Trump. Donald Trump, like the Republicans, he's talking the talk, but he ain't walking the walk. He's going to meet with the NRA. Well, our Republican colleagues have been doing that for decades. What's he going to come out saying? Oh, the NRA and I agree we shouldn't have terrorists have guns, but then do nothing about it or fight it by false and chimerical proposals like they have done. The NRA wants support of smokescreen proposals so that they're not going to do anything. The American people won't stand for a group that supports the rights of suspected terrorists over the health and safety of the country. Will Donald Trump realize that? The only way Donald Trump can prove he seriously wants to keep guns out of the hands of the terrorists is to convince the NRA to support Senator Feinstein's bill and Senator Murphy and Booker and my bill. That's it. So let's stop this kabuki dance. If Donald Trump feels terrorists shouldn't have guns, all he has to do is issue a two-sentence statement. Donald Trump supports the Feinstein bill, which keeps guns out of the hands of terrorists, and Donald Trump supports the Murphy-Booker-Schumer bill, which causes universal background checks. We're ready for your questions. Senator Blumenthal put it well. We have a whole lot of issues we want to pursue, including an assault weapons ban. As Dianne Feinstein and I were here, we're the authors of it. We believe in it. These are the first two things we're doing, but we're not stopping there. We don't know. For the first time, a few of our colleagues are actually saying we ought to do something. Now, whether they have the courage to buck the NRA and actually do something, instead of hiding behind these wolf in sheep's clothing proposals, we'll see. But at least they're feeling the heat, and the heat is on them, and on them in a way it's never been on them before, unfortunately, because we have 49 more people like these two fine women, and many more every day. We're going to first try to pass these bills. You know, let me say this. First, the bill that we have proposed, Senator Feinstein has proposed, has protections and has an appeal. The difference between that bill and the Toomey proposal and the Cornyn proposal is those two are intended to never deny a gun, or almost never, even to a terrorist. Thank you very much, everybody.